There's a couple of things I want to talk about with regards to the Seahawks, but first, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who has reached out to see how my wife is. She had pneumonia, was in hospital recently, as I've talked a little bit on air. Thankfully, she's well on the way to recovery now, is back home. So thank you to everybody who's posted a comment in the comment section. Thank you to Curtis Allen, who reached out. Curtis, a legend, of course, on Seahawks Draft Blog. Thank you to Brian at Hawk Blogger, who's reached out a couple of times. Just really appreciate it. I'm really happy to say that everybody is back well and on the road to being back to normal. So the two things that I wanted to talk about with the Seahawks, the first one was, I thought it was really interesting what Mike McDonald, the head coach, said about Byron Murphy's conditioning, because it made me think a little bit about a topic that I've thought about a few times over the years, which is how the NFL has structured draft season. So essentially, from Texas's point of view, the team that Byron Murphy played for, he played in the national championship playoff semifinal, and then his season ends. And then the minute that his season ends, because he's playing in the playoffs right at the end of the year and the start of the new year, he then has to get straight into draft mode. And when you are going through the draft process, you have to get into the best shape of your life, because you probably will never be in the same shape that you are at combine time, because you will never be training specifically to master certain events at, say, your peak weight, to get to your peak speed, to do agility testing the way that you need to do, to be able to bench a certain amount. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole package, everything is geared towards being in peak physical condition, and you have to retain that over a number of weeks. And then once you've done that, you then sort of retain a certain degree of athleticism if you plan to do most of your things at your pro day, or if you want to put on a really good performance at your pro day, which Byron Murphy did. And then he ran a short shuttle, for example, at his pro day. So once that is finished, that's when the training finally ends. So you go through a very intense period of, let's just suggest, in his case, about 6 weeks of fairly brutal, I imagine, peak physical condition retention. And then it just grinds to a halt. Like it just stops, because then what you're doing is flying all over the country. So you might have an official 30 visit in New York one day and then in Seattle the next. Or, I know what John Schneider said, basically to try and make life as easier for people. I think when he said that when Bo Nix visited the teams on the West Coast, that is when they fit in a meeting with Bo Nix. So they try and make it as easy as possible. Oh, you're over this way. Well, why don't you pop in and see us, around that same time? And, to try and ease the burden of traveling everywhere. But that is essentially what's happening. After the pro day, you're taking visits, you are maybe doing Zoom calls or whatever, but you're not working out. When you go on these official visits, what happens? You get taken out to dinner. You have like a fine steak and maybe some red wine or whatever to go with it. And, you're having a tour, and there's a lot of sitting around, and you're sitting on a plane and you're eating on the plane, and then you're snacking in the airport and stuff like that. So you go from being like intense into like basically preparing as if a world championship boxer was preparing for a big fight, and your fight is combine pro day, to doing what the boxer does immediately after he's finished training, which is to just go and then not have to do any of that for a while. And then you start eating things that maybe you shouldn't be eating during that period. And then you have this huge sort of like that, the last bit, there's been a huge process of meetings, and those meetings will be incredibly stressful, because every single one is, especially the combine and stuff like that, and they're like job interviews, and they're like, you might have 32 of them, and then maybe you'll do some teams again. Like anybody who has had a job interview in their life, imagine having like several of them a day, like you're doing at the combine, and then having to go all around the country and do it. So mentally it's exhausting, physically it's exhausting. Then you have like the crash of, right, this is all done. And then the emotional high of actually being drafted in the first round or the second, or even falling in the draft, and the emotions that come with that, and being really disappointed. And from that point, that huge celebratory moment of, wow, you've been taken 16th overall. You're then flown in for rookie minicamp and expected to get out there and start learning scheme and start. I just think there's got to be a better way for the NFL to do this. This is not a Seahawks thing. This is the NFL. This is an NFL thing. And I just don't think it's right. I think it's always confused me a little bit why the Senior Bowl happens before the Super Bowl. Like, why do they do that So if you're in the Super Bowl and you are your coaches and maybe even your like some of your GMs, they're like focusing on planning for the Super Bowl, but then everybody else is at the Senior Bowl, and you can't go all in on that event because you've got one game left. I've never really understood that. And then you're going to go from the Super Bowl like almost really quickly into the combine, and then a week later it's free agency, and you've got all of that going on. Then you've got your official visits. Then there's like the draft, and then there's like a long period where nothing happens. And I've always kind of thought, what's the rush? Why couldn't the draft, for example, be in another month? Like, and just sort of spread it out a little bit, and you know, not burden the players and the staff. Like, imagine the scouts and the coaches, what they have to go, especially like the new coaches. Mike McDonald's talked about this, that they couldn't even go to the combine because they were basically just getting everything set up as a new staff. Like, how can that be right? But the NFL's going to rush everything through. And I don't know, maybe if rather than this just as like me ranting away here, maybe if there was like a GM on and I was interviewing him, he'd say, well, it's because you've got to do this and this and this, and there's a reason why the schedule is what it is. And that's fair enough. Maybe there is an understandable argument for that. But when Mike McDonald was talking about Byron Murphy's conditioning, and I suspect it's not just Byron Murphy. It's like all of the rookies. They've just kind of gone through this whole like emotional roller coaster, and then getting really high up in your physical, peak condition, and then not having to be your physical peak condition for like a month. And like I say, probably eating a bit too much, celebrating when you got drafted. Because who could begrudge I don't know if Byron Murphy did or not. What if it had a couple of slices of pizza and some beers or something? I don't know, or some champagne, or whatever it is that he likes. Who would have begrudged him that on draft day after he's been drafted in the first round? Certainly not me. So, and then you've got to go to mini camp and got to get right back into it. And then the coaches are saying, right, now you've got to get back into your conditioning. And then you come for mini camp, and then you're basically just off on your way for a few months where nothing happens. And then the teams have to just keep the fingers crossed. There's nothing they can do. They've just got to keep the fingers crossed that for the next, all the way through to training camp, that they will stay on top of their conditioning, and they will be in, they will come into training camp in some shape. And that, I know that there's a lot more rookies now come into the league and hit the ground running and actually do perform at a reasonably high standard straight away, more so than perhaps, years ago. And maybe some of the lines between college football and the NFL have blurred, so that, and then kind of things are meshing together. So it's a bit of an easier transition there. But at the same time, I do feel like there just could be a better way of doing this sort of post-season, post-playoff, post-Super Bowl schedule to just make it less of a stress on the players, less of a stress on the teams. And I think, like I said, the two sort of ideas that I would have is either you just do the draft earlier. I do sometimes wonder a little bit whether the draft process is too long. I know that the teams need like the medical information, and they want to do all of the background checks, and they want to sort of get to know the players as much as possible, because it is a very expensive investment in especially a first round pick, and you want to get your draft picks right. But do you really need to sort of go, if you're not had enough time during the college season to watch the tape and study, and when you've had the combine, you might have had a chance to speak to people. Do we really need all these official visits and everything? Do teams end up overthinking these things? Is the process just so long? Perhaps they could, get on with the draft a bit sooner and not have it at the end of April, some 6 weeks after free agency. Maybe it could happen a bit quicker, or maybe it could even happen before free agency. I mean, listen, I suspect there's no motivation in the NFL to change the schedule. I'm just saying what I think would be a little bit fairer, and then maybe have a bit more time before rookie minicamp, so the players can have a couple of weeks flipping break after all of the draft stress, just to unscramble the brain, and then sort of get back to, okay, I've got a couple of weeks now after unscrambling my brain for maybe a couple of weeks to get into shape, to come to rookie minicamp, to become a professional player. Maybe that'd be better. Or maybe you spread it out a little bit more so that you're not rushing straight into Senior Bowl, combine, free agency, draft, minicamp, and then just a long, boring bit in the NFL season where nothing happens. I don't know. Maybe there is a way to spread this out and for the NFL to dominate all year round. Because quite frankly, I know they've got the schedule released next week, but once that happens, the NFL's boring top 100 list, which doesn't make any sense. It ain't occupying my mind for a couple of weeks, and I doubt it's occupying many others' mind. There is that sort of big blank gap in the schedule, which seems a bit waste, a bit of a waste, like having half a steak and chucking the rest away, a Wagyu steak, and like lobbing the rest in the bin when you've got a couple of months there you could use. And then maybe there's the process just flows nicely. So the players have got time to get trained and ready, and then got time to do the visits, and then have got time to prepare themselves for minicamp, and they've got time for training camp. And then the teams haven't got to worry when there's this big long stretch of weeks on end where players can eat, drink, do whatever they want before training camp starts again. If that time was a bit small, maybe that's just easier for those players to say, I've got training camp in 2 weeks. I'm not going on a bender. Like, I'm not going to eat that whole pizza. I'm not, maybe it'd just be a bit easier for them. It just made me think whether there's a better way of doing this, whether for a league that is so, it's just a huge money-making extravaganza for the owners that is dominating the minds of American sports fans, which is increasingly gaining the attention of sports fans in Europe and around the world. The game is just expanding and expanding. Is there a better way to get through the off season and max out your best young players? I just wonder if there is. And that's sort of what came into my mind when Mike McDonald was talking about Byron Murphy getting into his best shape. It wasn't, he's had too many burgers this week. It was more a case of, how on earth can you expect a human to just be like up, down, up, down, up, down with his weight, his physical condition and the emotions and the meetings and the traveling and the draft emotion and going first and then doing press conference, interview. There just has to be a better way of doing it than this. But then you could probably say all sorts of things. There's a better way of doing this about the NFL. There's a better way of doing that. This is just one of those things. So I thought it was maybe it's a topic that only interests me. Maybe you don't give a toss, but I thought it was something that sprung to my mind, and I wanted to share it in a video after listening to Mike McDonald talk after rookie minicamp. And speaking of, and the other thing I wanted to talk about today, listening to Mike McDonald, I just had to say what a relief it was to hear a new coach's voice again talking about the rookies. And it is nothing against Pete Carroll. I've always maintained, as much as I wanted to move on from Pete Carroll, I had no disrespect for Pete Carroll. The bloke won the first ever Super Bowl for the franchise that I follow, and will be eternally grateful for that. But as I was listening to McDonald speak, it was just such a relief that it just wasn't Pete talking again this year, that it was somebody else with fresh ideas, with a fresh approach, saying different things. It did make me think this should have changed a while ago. I mean, if we're being really honest now, and look, I can't say that in 2017 I was banging the table for Carroll to go, because I wasn't. I felt that he deserved to go through the reset, that first reset, and have another go at this. But with hindsight, I think that was wrong of me to have that opinion. I think it's pretty clear that after what happened at the end of the Super Bowl, that the team needed a full reset then. I mean, it was reported by Jay Glaze that he was considering retirement that offseason. And in hindsight, I think things would be much better if he did go there. There's nothing we can do about that now. But as he kind of stayed, and then 2017 turned into 2023, it became clear that things just stagnated and become stale. I do firmly believe that coaches have a shelf life. I believe that about Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh as well. I am not convinced that Mike Tomlin is ever going to get Pittsburgh back to the Super Bowl unless I think the coaches who endure are the ones who have the fortune of being paired or the foresight to pair themselves with a special, rare player. Belichick and Brady. I do not think Bill Belichick would have had the success or the tenure in length in New England, as I think we all see post Brady, unless Tom Brady was there. Because he was. They stayed for a long, long time, had an obscene amount of success. There you go. I think the same thing's happening with Andy Reid. And again, kudos to the Chiefs for having the foresight to trade up for Mahomes. They aggressively attacked him. They didn't have him fall into their lap. And they're reaping the benefits. And Andy Reid could probably coach for as long as he wants now. And he will win more Super Bowls because he has somebody unbelievable in Mahomes. And they are a good enough drafting team to put a supporting cast around Mahomes. So things will be good there. But I think in most of the cases, coaches have a shelf life. Either they run out of energy and need a break. I think we will see that with Sean McVay soon enough. He's already been sort of flirting with that quite a lot. He seems to be re-energized now, but we'll see how re-energized he is when Matt Stafford's not there anymore. And then I think there are other coaches like Carroll and Tomlin, and perhaps you could even make that argument for Harbaugh in Baltimore. Like if they do not win a title in the next couple of years, I guarantee. And if Mike Macdonald starts succeeding in Seattle, there's gonna be Ravens fans thinking should have moved off to someone like Mike Macdonald and should have passed the baton on, and that he's stayed too long. I mean, it's been a long time since he won a Super Bowl, and I do think coaches do generally outstay the welcome quite often in the NFL. I think in other sports, in that English soccer, for example, football over here, it's very rare for a coach these days to stay for a long, long time, 10 plus years. In the NFL, it still happens, but I'm not sure it is the best thing. And I don't think it was the best thing with Pete Carroll. And I think he just stayed too long. And I think the game has changed to an extent. And I will never, ever claim to be an X's and O's expert. And I do not know enough to sort of sit here and give you a detailed breakdown to firmly validate this. But I just get the sense that the NFL is going through a period right now where sort of game to game specific planning and matchup opportunities are critical. And some might say it's always been that case. But I do think Carroll was more of a, this is what we are, and we are going to be our best selves and try and beat the team that way most weeks, if not all weeks. Now, that's not to say that Carroll wasn't adaptable. He did change things. He tweaked his schemes. He had different ideas. He had different coaches who probably pitched different ideas. But generally speaking, I mean, the games that you saw, the Seahawks were the Seahawks. The Seahawks never really had a new wrinkle that they would expose to really beat an opponent. Like it did feel quite samey by the end when they played Kyle Shanahan, that Kyle Shanahan was able to move the ball in a way that he wasn't earlier in his tenure in San Francisco. And McVay's always had Seattle's number. They've always been able to beat the Seahawks. So I think we're going into a period where you've got to make teams guess. You've got to be unpredictable. You've got to ask questions, and the other team's going to have some answers sometimes, but you've got to have answers to their questions, and you have got to stop them, and you've got to find people creative and multiple and varied. I think that's just what the league is right now. I think that's what McVay does very well, and I think it's what Mike Macdonald does very, very well. And I think this is to the real benefit of the Seahawks, that you kind of like look at the personnel that they've got now, and you think, yeah, I can see why, how that person can be quite versatile, and how you can sort of mask where he's going to be, and you can flip coverages, and you can deceive opponents, and that they're going to stunt the defensive tackles a lot, and they're going to have their edge rushers doing a lot of different things, not just rushing the edge. And I think it's going to be very, very multiple and creative. And then with Ryan Grubb, the thing that I think it was Jack Westover, it may have been Troy Fatone, but one of them told us that basically he's a mad scientist, that one year going into UW, he just decided, right, that's it. We're completely changing the running system because this is going to win us more games. And, it seems to me like he is also somebody who will say, right, we're playing this opponent. This is their weakness. We're attacking it. Who's the pigeon in coverage? We're going to put DK on them. We're going to get matchup opportunities. We're going to exploit it. This team ain't a good run defense. This is the kind of run system to beat this team. And I just didn't really get the sense that the Seahawks did a lot of that from the count. They might have done, but it never really felt it. The results never showed. And when Carroll did try and change things and switch defensive fronts and use different concepts, it never worked, did it? I mean, the defense has been crap for years, and the offense was just completely vanilla. So, I think it's a really good thing. One, to hear somebody new and different, but two, to have somebody new and different that I kind of think fits with the modern NFL. And I also think these kind of coaches, as we've probably seen with McVay, stand the test of time a bit more because they're always looking for that advantage, that edge. I suspect that, like, come next year, Mike Macdonald will be digging around for ideas to catch opponents off guard, and will constantly be asking questions of the Shanahans and McVays rather than them, just consistently beating the Seahawks because we don't really have much of an answer for them. So I think it's refreshing. I think the sad thing is like I said earlier, there's a big boring bit in the middle of the year for the NFL, and we are very much in it now. So we're going to have to wait to see what this is all going to look like. But, September will be here soon enough, and we get to find out what Mike Macdonald's Seahawks look like. Okay, so there we go. I did say on the blog I was going to take a break. I have got an incredibly busy May in terms of day job coming up. So I am going to, I'm not so much going to confirm that, oh, I'm taking a break and I'll see you later in the year. It's not going to be like that. I'm going to do stuff when I can. I am already looking at the 2025 quarterbacks, but I've got a lot more work to do there before I want to sort of come out and say what I think about them. But I'm doing some work on that. There will be things happening with the Seahawks that I want to sort of react to, or there may just be thoughts that pop into my head, like with this video, that I want to do that. So what I would just suggest is keep an eye on SeahawksDraftBlog.com, because I will write when I get a chance to write, when I've got something to say. And I will do videos on here when I've got something to say. I'm still going to do Puck Sports every Thursday, so make sure you check that out. And like I said, we're doing the videos and always open to, if I can fit it in the schedule, which is pretty busy at the moment, appearing on other pods. So I'll let you know if I'm on any of those as well. But make sure you subscribe to this channel. It'd be great to get it up towards 10,000. Now, we've been steadily climbing this year in terms of subscribers. It'd be great to get close to 10,000. So if you haven't subscribed already, and it's about half of you watch the videos have not subscribed, hit the subscribe button, support the channel, like the video, leave a comment. SeahawksDraftBlog.com, as always, for more analysis. But for now,